Sata Shri Shrimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Sikoho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Sharma Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Ki Jai, Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We're continuing the reading today of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. And we'll also be reading excerpts from Blazing Sadhus, or Never Trust a Holy Man Who Can't Dance by Achyut Nanda Das, and a book of poetry by Satsvarup Das Goswami entitled With Srila Prabhupada in the Early Days. So last week, the last frame that we saw, Srila Prabhupada had shown Jadharani how to transpose the pictures that he had brought from India into large canvases by using a grid system and copying into each grid the picture. So this is one of the pictures that Srila Prabhupada had brought with him from India of Lord Chaitanya on Sankirtan. When the painting of Lord Chaitanya was finished, Swamiji had it hung in the temple. Now, he announced, there should be no more nonsense here. Lord Chaitanya is present. After the morning kirtan, Swami said, as usual, now chant one round. They chanted together, following him. They all had a vow to chant 16 rounds daily. But they chanted their first round in the morning in the Swami's presence, so he could see each of them. You can see here in Prabhupada's hands, he would take the beads out of his japa bag and chant with his hands. As Swamiji chanted, he looked out at 2nd Avenue, which was mostly deserted. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. Or at the pictures on the wall, or with concerned glances at the individual devotees. Sometimes he seemed surprised when he saw them chanting so earnestly, giving evidence of the power of the holy name to deliver even the most fallen. Some of the devotees kept their beads in a bead bag like his, but when they chanted the first round together in the morning, they imitated him by holding their beads out in both hands and chanting along with him, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, until they finished one round. Then he held up the unfamiliar red book. So that unfamiliar red book we heard about last week, Srila Prabhupada had brought with him the Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bengali. And it was a big red book. And it was that Chaitanya Charitamrita that Prabhupada took intense pleasure reading while he was on the boat for 37 days. So now, for the first time, Srila Prabhupada is beginning to read the Chaitanya Charitamrita in the intimate morning classes with the devotees. Prabhupada said, because you are a little advanced, he said, I'm going to read today from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Chaitanya what? No one was able to pick up the pronunciation. They had heard of Chaitanya, certainly, but not of this new book. But in his room the night before, Prabhupada had informed some of the devotees that he would start reading from a new book, Chaitanya Charitamrita. He said that Lord Chaitanya had told one of his disciples that understanding Krishna wasn't really possible, but that he would give the disciple just a drop of the ocean of Krishna consciousness, so that the disciple could then appreciate what the whole ocean must be like. That's where the term, the book Nectar of Devotion, in the Sanskrit it's called Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. That's the Rasamrita, the nectar of rasa from the ocean of devotion. So if you take one drop of that ocean and taste it, then you can understand the taste of the entire ocean. Be patient as I present this, he had told them. It is revolutionary, but you should just be patient. In the storefront, Brahmananda turned on the reel-to-reel tape recorder as Swamiji began reading the Bengali verses, and both Satsvarup and Umapati opened their notebooks and waited, poised for rapid note-taking. It was almost a college classroom atmosphere as Prabhupada cleared his throat, put on his eyeglasses, and peered over the large open volume, turning to the correct page. Whenever he wore the glasses, he seemed to reveal a new personality of deep Vaishnava scholarship. This feature of Swamiji emphasized his old age. Not that it showed him feeble or invalid, but it emphasized his scholarship and wisdom and his contemplation of the scriptures, in contrast to his vigorous drum playing in Topgate Square Park or his alert business dealings while looking for a new building. So Srila Prabhupada, he wanted us to become expert at everything. Not that just one thing we're good at, but he wanted us to be all-rounder Vaishnavas. And therefore, as we take to Krishna consciousness, we learn everything. We learn cooking, we learn deity worship, we learn how to give classes, we learn how to sing, we learn how to play musical instruments, we learn how to sew, we learn so many different arts. If you look in the Brahma Samhita, you will read about the 64 arts that Srimati Radharani and her confidants are expert in. It includes engineering, architecture, gemology, all types of sciences and arts, including different types of baking, making tinctures of drinks, the 64 arts, and that is what goes on in the spiritual world. So gradually, as we advance in our Krishna consciousness, we become expert at all of these arts and all of the different ways to please Krishna, just as Srimati Radharani does. So here they were highlighting, seeing Prabhupada in his mode of scholarship, when he put on his glasses and began to read the Bengali from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Swamiji began reading and translating the story of Sanatana. Satsvarup wrote Sutta, and Umapati wrote Sonotan. So Srila Prabhupada did not begin at Adi Lila chapter 1. He went to the Madhya Lila chapter 20, when Sanatana Goswami, the entire story of how he escaped from the Shah and how he went and met Lord Chaitanya in Varanasi, and his brother Rupa, and how they became intimate associates of Lord Chaitanya. It was an historical account. Rupa and Sanatana had been born as Brahmins in India, but they had served in the government under the Muslims, who were in power at that time. The two brothers had even adopted Muslim names. Now, Rupa and Sanatana, it's not that they chose to serve as ministers. It was because of their acumen, they were forced to serve. Because the Muslim rulers did not trust the other Muslims. Because we hear in history how even in the families, the brothers would kill their own brothers, the sons would imprison their own fathers. So they didn't trust their fellow Muslims. They had the Hindus as their ministers because they had ethics. So they were forced into the service of the Shah at that time. And they held, one was Sanatana Goswami, he was the chief minister. And Rupa Goswami was a financial minister, very important roles in the government. And the Shah, Hussein Shah, he depended heavily upon these two brothers. And therefore, when they met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at Ramakeli, which is where they were stationed at the time, Rupa Goswami, because he was a financial minister, a lot of people wanted his post. So when he did what's it called, VR, voluntary retirement, they were just very happy about that because then they could take over his post as financial minister. And he had accumulated so much wealth that it filled up boats of gold coins. And he very astutely distributed all of his wealth. He gave 50% to the Vaishnavas and the Brahmins for propagating Krishna consciousness. He gave only 25% to his family. His family was in East Bengal. He took that by boat to give to the family. And he kept 25% for emergency purposes. And he kept that 25%. They didn't have banks that cheat you of all of your money in those days. They kept their money with grocers. And the grocer would keep an account as things were taken off of that money. So he kept it with the grocer where they lived. And therefore later, Sanatana Goswami would be able to use that money to escape from prison. But when Lord Chaitanya was touring in their part of the country, they had met him and had become determined to give up their materialistic ways and follow his path of pure love of God. So this is the first time Lord Chaitanya was being spoken about in the classes. In the introduction of the Srimad Bhagavatam that Srila Prabhupada had given the devotees in his 3 volumes, the introduction has a life history of Lord Chaitanya. But now for the first time he's going into detail of Lord Chaitanya's adventures with his devotees. So this is all very new for the devotees. And that's why Umapati and Satsvarup, they were keeping notes. And it's those notes later that the devotees used to give classes, and Prabhupada would check their notes to make sure that they were correct, what they were writing. Rupa, who was so rich that he had enough gold to fill 2 boats, left his high government post, divided his wealth, became a mendicant, and joined Lord Chaitanya. So Rupa Goswami, along with his brother Anupam, his name also Anupam Malak or Sri Vallabh, they left and they met Lord Chaitanya in Prayagraj at the time of the Magh Mela. And for 10 days, Lord Chaitanya instructed Rupa Goswami at Dasashvamedha Ghat on the principles of Krishna consciousness. Now, just as 1 drop of ocean water, it's the same quality, but not the same quantity. But Rupa Goswami was so erudite, he was such a scholar of the Vedic Shastras, that after only 10 days, Lord Chaitanya instilled within his heart his mercy, so that he would be able to expand upon those 10 days of hearing from Lord Chaitanya personally, to write prolifically such books as Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Ujjvala Nilamani, so many dramas, so many leelas, and that way he was able to make, just as we are called Rupanugas, followers of Rupa Goswami, he was able to make the foundation of Krishna consciousness that is still carried on to this present day in just 10 days of instruction. For Sanatan, however, there were more obstacles. The Nawab Shah, the chief Muslim ruler of the province of Bengal, was dependent on Sanatan's managerial expertise. But Sanatan began staying home and submitting sick reports, while actually he had employed 12 Brahmins who were teaching him the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Nawab sent his physician to find out the actual state of Sanatan's health. And when the Nawab heard that Sanatan was not actually ill, he himself arrived one day, surprising Sanatan and the Brahmins. The Nawab demanded that Sanatan return to his government work and leave him free to do some hunting and to leave Bengal on a military campaign. Now that military campaign was, he wanted to go to Utkal, to Orissa, and he wanted to overtake Orissa and Jagannath Puri. So, and unless Sanatan Goswami was running the government, the Shah was not free to do his campaigning in Utkal. So therefore he needed Sanatan to come back and take up his post again. But Sanatan said that he could not, that he was now determined to study the scriptures, and that the Nawab could do with him whatever he liked. At this challenge, the Nawab imprisoned Sanatan. Swamiji looked at his watch. Morning classes were shorter than those in the evening, only half an hour. And Rupanuga, Satsvarup, and Brahmananda had to go to work. He paused in his narration. So, we will discuss tomorrow. Prabhupada closed the book, and after a few informal words, he got up and left the storefront, followed by Kirtanananda, who carried his book and glasses. So these three devotees, Rupanuga, he had a government job, Satsvarup, he had a government job, and Brahmananda, he was a school teacher, also a government job. They had responsible positions, just like Rupa and Sanatan had. And their responsible positions, they were supporting the entire temple. They were paying the rent, the electricity, the gas, everything, so the Prabhupada would have time to sit and translate and prepare his books and give classes and plan for the campaign of Krishna consciousness. So there was a great similarity between what Srila Prabhupada had chosen to speak about and what was going on right just at that time in the Krishna consciousness movement. Because without the help of these devotees, well, how is Prabhupada going to be able to just sit and translate and plan for making more temples around the world? So we'll read about that later. At one point, I think it's later today, Satsvarup, without informing Prabhupada, and by the way, one time Srila Prabhupada told Satsvarup that you are the incarnation of Sanatan Goswami. Yes. So Satsvarup, I think I can read it now to you. He decided, because he had to go to work every day, he had to stay at a job from 9 to 5. And he couldn't be with Prabhupada like all the other devotees were and sit at Prabhupada's feet and ask him questions and cook for him and go places with him. No, he had to sit in a welfare office and take care of everybody's problems, and he would just get back in time to listen to the class in the evening. So without consulting anyone, he resigned from his job. And he thought Prabhupada would be happy that he had given up everything and now he could be a full-time devotee. I'm just going to read that part. As I became attracted to the activities of Srila Prabhupada and his followers, I began to resent the time I was spending at my job, which kept me away from Prabhupada's association for 8 hours a day. The other boys who had no jobs could see him all day. They would sit around him in his clean, sunny apartment while he talked about Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He was asking them to help him spread love of Krishna, and together they were making plans. Although I was already pledging all of my money to Prabhupada to run the temple and an apartment, I began to feel I was missing out. I decided I could no longer keep my job. I wanted to join Prabhupada and renounce the material world with its birth, death, and old age. I decided it would be a further commitment on my part to resign from my work and live as a full-time disciple like the others. Without consulting Prabhupada or anyone else, I obtained an official resignation form, filled it out, and handed it in to my supervisor, Mr. Rice. I gave the welfare department a 2 weeks' notice and stated my reason for resigning. Quote, to study the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita with my guru, unquote. Young people were regularly resigning from the welfare office. It's a very tough job. You have to deal with everybody's problems, especially in New York, a lot of problems. So my resignation did not create a commotion, although my unusual reason did raise some eyebrows. During my lunch hour, I ran to Prabhupada. He was seated on his mat behind his small desk, and the boys were gathered around him asking questions and listening. I quit my job, I told him. Oh? Why is that? You're offering such nice service. He seemed disappointed in me. But I want to come daily and be part of the camp. I want to learn Krishna consciousness. Seeing my predicament, the boys present said they would take jobs and let me spend more time listening to Prabhupada. They suggested taking a job and alternating it with each other. But Prabhupada told me a story. Listen to this story, it's amazing. There was once a faithful wife who had an ugly husband with a morose disposition. One day, his wife asked, "Why are you morose? I do anything you want and still you feel morose. Why is that?" The husband said, "I wish to have sex with a certain prostitute," he admitted, "but she cost $1,000 just for one night, and I cannot afford her." The faithful wife said to her ugly husband, "Don't worry, I shall arrange it." She immediately went to the prostitute's house and began attending her, cleaning her room and performing other services. When the prostitute came home and noticed her activities, she asked, "Why are you working here?" The woman said, "My husband desires to enjoy you, and I hope you will take my services as a payment so that he might spend one night with you." The prostitute laughed. "Don't you realize that I cost over $1,000 a night? How can you ever raise that much money?" So, in addition to serving the prostitute, the wife herself turned into prostitution and eventually raised the required amount of money. She turned to her husband and said, "All right, you can go to that prostitute now." And he gladly went at once. Prabhupada stopped and said that although people criticized the wife as crazy and immoral, nevertheless she was unquestionably faithful to her husband and tried her best to fulfill his desires. Prabhupada didn't have to say more. I got the idea that although I did not think it was spiritually beneficial to work at the welfare office with people whose association was abominable and boring and kept me away from him all day, he thought that by contributing the earnings from my job, I was rendering the best possible service. If that was the service he required from me, I should do it, and that would please Krishna. I reported back to my office and reassured my supervisor that I had changed my mind and did not want to resign. Okay? So, so we have to understand why Prabhupada picked that particular part of the Chaitanya Charitamrita to help the devotees understand what real renunciation is. Okay. He paused in his narration. So we will discuss tomorrow. Prabhupada closed the book, and after a few informal words, he got up and left the storefront, followed by Kirtananda. Kirtananda had become the personal servant of Prabhupada then. Breakfast was served every morning in the storefront. Either Achyutananda or Kirtananda would cook an oatmeal cereal for the devotees. Satsvarup had read in an English edition of the Ramayana about some sages preparing a mystical cereal called heavenly porridge. The name had caught on, and the devotees began calling their own cereal heavenly porridge. The name had, the popular fare would consist of steaming hot heavenly porridge, sweetened to taste, with sugar syrup from the gulab jamun pot, hot milk, and fruit, and each devotee would get an ISKCON bullet. Okay, so now we have a description of Achyutananda cooking. Now these gulab jamuns, we know how to make gulab jamuns here in India, but in America no one had ever seen a gulab jamun. And Prabhupada was teaching them the traditional way to make gulab jamun, and that's with, you boil milk, you make chena, very soft paneer, and you roll it, and then you fry it in ghee, and then you soak it in chasni, in the sugar water. It's a very lengthy process, and every part of it has to be perfectly done. So, Swamiji was teaching them how to make the gulab jamuns. One day the Swami said, get 20 pounds of milk, that's 20 liters. I will show you how to make gulab jamuns, because Prabhupada was making them all himself. We gathered the ingredients. Boil the milk till it is just ready to overflow, then add the citric acid. So they didn't have lemons. Lemons are different in America. Lemons are the size of apples, and they're a little sweet. They're not sour like the little ones we have here. So they don't make such good chena. So you have to use citric acid sometimes. The milk separated into solids and liquids, or curds and whey. Now drain it, rub the solids smooth, make small balls, and fry them in ghee. All the curd balls broke up into little pieces. They had made it too soft. Add a little of your cornstarch. Prabhupada knew about cornstarch. I don't know how he knew that cornstarch would work, but it did. After an overnight soaking in sugar syrup, the balls of curd tasted like sweet sponges exploding in your mouth, but making them was a long, tedious, and expensive process. Then I accomplished a great service to the devotees and all of mankind. This is his service. I invented American gulab jamuns when I got an idea. Wait a minute. Powdered milk is milk solids, so we don't have to make curds from gallons of milk. We can make powdered milk dough. roll it into balls, and fry them. It worked. The Swami's rule was that cooks should not wash dishes. It is a contradiction in service. The cook will not want to use many pots as he needs if he thinks, I'll have to wash all of those later. But he had a hard time finding helpers to do the dishes. So Prabhupada understood the logic that if you're cooking and you also have to wash the pots, you'll use as little number of pots as possible, and it might diminish your cooking. So a different person had to be the pot washer. But we had a hard time finding helpers to do the dishes. There were 12 of us now, and the Swami called all of us to his room. Everyone will take 1 day for dishwashing. After some silence, someone raised a hand. I'll do Monday. Someone else volunteered for Tuesday. Then more silence. The Swami raised his hand and said, I will take Thursdays. 3 hands shot up. After 6 months, more than 50 people were regularly attending morning and evening kirtan and lectures. Lunches and Sunday feasts were so packed that we had to use the garden to accommodate everyone. We set up a dais about 2 feet high with a book stand for the Swami to lecture from. He would take the high step up and then settle onto the dais. One morning, he set a thick, heavy book on the book stand. This is Chaitanya Charitamrita. Most scholars would translate that as the nectar of Chaitanya's pastimes. But the Swami translated it in practical terms. Chaitanya means the living force. Charit means characteristics, and Amrit means immortality. This is the characteristics of the living force in immortality. I regularly got up at 5 o'clock and made this is Achutananda's book, so this is Achutananda speaking. I regularly got up at 5 o'clock and made a huge pot of oatmeal, that's this heavenly porridge, for 20 people who came for breakfast before going to their jobs. 20 devotees would take this heavenly porridge every morning. One day I was serving it out and someone said, "This cereal is too hot." I said, "Take a walk in the forest." I was proud of my porridge. Okay, so that's the cook of heavenly porridge is speaking. So in India, people don't eat, or this is in the early days, people didn't eat oatmeal. It was fed to the horses. And then finally, America used to give like welfare to India. And we saw oatmeal come because oatmeal is it's a Western thing because it creates a lot of heat in the body. So in cold countries, they eat oatmeal because it keeps them warm all day long. So then they started, what's the name of that oatmeal that anyway, we knew that the oatmeal, you would take off the paper wrapper and it would say U.S. donation. You know, it was coming for free from America, but they were selling it here in India. So many, they would send butter oil, they would send oatmeal, they would send a lot of things as welfare, but then somewhere along the line, people would get it and then they would sell it in the shops. So, but in America, people lived on oatmeal in the morning. They would cook this oatmeal and it became the heavenly porridge. After breakfast this morning, the talk was of Rupa and Sanatana. Umapati said that the Chaitanya Charitamrita was available in an English translation, but maybe the Swami wouldn't want them to read it. We'll hear it from Swamiji, Kirtanananda said. Hayagriva was amused at the cliffhanger ending of the class. So cliffhanger, that's an expression in English that, let's say someone is walking on a mountain and suddenly they fall off of a cliff and they're hanging with their hands on the cliff. And whether the person's going to be able to get back up or he's going to fall down and you'll never see him again, that's called cliffhanging. So when Prabhupada finished the reading, the Nawab had just put Sanatana Goswami into jail. So that's called a cliffhanger, because you don't know whether he's going to escape, whether he's going to die, and they had to wait till the next day to hear what was going to happen. Tune in tomorrow, he laughed loosely, and hear what happened to, what's his name? The devotees responded differently. Santan, Sonotan, Sanatan, they weren't quite getting it right. Hayagriva, yeah, tune in tomorrow and hear. Will Sanatan get out of jail? They were not the most sober group when together, especially after taking the thick, sweet syrup. Achyutananda spilled some of the syrup on the rug, and Kirtanananda admonished him. Jadharani ate silently and hurried to begin a day's painting in Prabhupada's room. Satsvarup adjusted his tie, and he and Rupanuga and Brahmananda went to their jobs. So they have a routine now. They get up, like for instance, Achyutananda, he would get up at 5 and do the cooking. They would sit at 6 o'clock in the temple room. Prabhupada would come in. They would chant their first round on their beads with Prabhupada. Then for only half an hour, 6:30 till 6:30, they would hear the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Then they would go take prasadam, heavenly porridge. And then after that, everyone would go for their jobs or their services. The next morning, the Chaitanya Charitamrita seminar began with Sanatana in jail, planning how to get free to join Lord Chaitanya. His brother Rupa sent him a note saying that he had left a large sum of gold for Sanatana in the care of a grocer, and Sanatana offered the gold to the jailer as a bribe. He told him, "Sir, I know you are a very learned man." He's a jailer. And in your Quran, it says that if you aid someone in going to spiritual life, then you will be elevated to the highest post. I am going to Lord Chaitanya, and if you will assist me in escaping, it will be spiritual gain for you. Also, I will give you 500 gold coins. So it will be material gain as well. So Sanatana, he was a diplomat. He knew how to get things done. First you have to flatter a person. The jailkeeper said, "All right, but I am afraid of the king." So Sanatana advised him, "Just say that when I was passing stool by the river, I fell in with my chains and was washed away." For 700 gold coins, the jailer agreed to help Sanatana and sawed off the shackles. Sanatana, accompanied by his servant, then fled by the back roads until by nighttime he came upon a hotel. So Srila Prabhupada, when he lived in Delhi, he used to go to Tihar jail and preach to the prisoners there, because one of the ministers, I think it was the education minister or the vice president, I forget who it was, he challenged Prabhupada that you're offering these books, but I want to see if you can actually help these people who are in jail. So Prabhupada would go to Tihar jail and he would preach to the prisoners, and he said that he remembered that they had shackles on. They were in those days they would shackle the prisoners. That was in the 1950s, 1960s, and they were shackled against the walls. So this was a common practice in India, and they had shackled Sanatan. I don't know, ready to go. There. So here are the shackles, and the jailer had to cut off the shackles so that Sanatan could escape. Now this hotel was kept by thieves, and an astrologer at the hotel read Sanatan's palm and judged by the stars that he had money. When Sanatan asked for assistance in passing over the jungle mountains, the hotel keeper said that he would help Sanatan leave in the dead of night. They treated Sanatan with great respect, which made him suspicious, since he hadn't eaten in 3 days and his clothes were unclean. So Sanatan hadn't taken anything with him. He had just escaped from the jail, but he did have a servant with him. So what happened was, he asked his servant if he had any money, because Sanatan was a very intelligent politician, and he was wondering, why is this hotel keeper treating him with such respect when he had nothing? So he suspected something. The servant said yes, he had 7 gold coins, and Sanatan immediately took the money to the hotel keeper, who was already planning to kill him during the night and take his money. Swamiji looked at his watch. Again, they had gone over time. So we will continue tomorrow, he said, closing the book, how Sanatan manages to escape the dacoits. Kirtanananda, Brahmananda, Achyutananda, Gargamuni, Satsvarup, Hayagriva, Umapati, Jadharani, Rupanuga, Damodar, that's Dan Clark, the photographer. Their lives had all been transformed. Over the months, they had transferred the center of their lives to Swamiji, and everything revolved around the routine of classes and kirtan and prasadam and coming and going to and from the storefront. So for those of you who don't know these personalities, a lot of them, Kirtananda, he's no longer on the planet. Brahmananda is no longer on the planet. Achyutananda lived in India for many years, but at the time of when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, prior to that, anyone who was from a Commonwealth country was allowed to live in India without a visa. And that was why Prabhupada had a lot of English and Australian and Canadian devotees living here in India to run the temples. Achyutananda was American. He joined at 26 2nd Avenue. But he had come along with Srila Prabhupada in 1967. He had learned Bengali proficiently. Prabhupada had him live with his godbrothers, so he had learned the whole Bengali etiquette of Vaishnavism, and he had gotten permanent residency. But then when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, all of the immigration rules were cut. Everyone had to have a visa, everyone had to be registered, the government had to know where all the foreigners were, because they suspected terrorists had, it was just like what's going on now with Pakistan and America and India. Everyone had to be registered and the government had to know where all the foreigners were. So Achyutananda, rather than risking losing his permanent residency, he went back to America at that time. That was 1984. And he's been staying at our temples. He's now in Alachua. And that was where he wrote this wonderful book of his memories of Srila Prabhupada from 1966 onwards. So, so Chutananda is still alive. Gargamuni is still alive. He lives here at Ananda Krishnavan. Satsvarup is still alive, but he lives in America. He is wheelchair. He needs the assistance of a wheelchair now. So he doesn't come anymore to India, although he used to come almost every year. Hayagriva has gone back to Godhead. Umapati, I believe he's in China. Jadharani is also alive, but she's in America. Rupanuga is also in America. Damodar is also in America. So most of you have not met these devotees. So just to help you out a little bit. Excuse me? Jadharani? No, that's Jagatarini. Jadharani was the wife of Satsvarup. Yes, we'll read about that later. So here is Satsvarup. Behind him is Damodar. This is Jadharani. Here's Gargamuni. There's Brahmananda. And in the back is Rupanuga. Okay? Brahmananda and Gargamuni had given up their apartment several months ago, and Brahmananda and Gargamuni are brothers. They were Bruce and Gary Schroff, Brahmananda and Gargamuni. They had given up their apartment several months ago and moved into the storefront. The ceiling of Achutananda's apartment had caved in one day, just minutes after he had left the room, and he had decided to move to the storefront also. So we're going to read about this episode with Achutananda. Okay. One evening I was at home reading my Theosophical Society edition of the Bhagavad Gita, and a few chips of plaster fell on the pages. I looked up and saw 3 huge cracks moving into the center of the ceiling. 3 2-inch thick chunks of plaster were sagging and ready to fall. I got out of the room to look for somebody like a building superintendent, but there was none. As soon as I got to the ground floor, I heard a sound as if a shotgun went off. I went back upstairs and saw a cloud of dust. The pieces of plaster, each about 1 yard wide and 2 inches thick, had smashed everything in my room. So we're reading nowadays about whole buildings collapsing and the people getting stuck in the building. So this happens in America also. It's not just in India that things like that happen. Also in America, roofs collapse. I went to 26 2nd Avenue. It was early evening, about 7 o'clock. I told Swamiji what happened. Krishna saved you, he said. Can I sleep here tonight? Yes, just go downstairs. The boys will help you. One of the boys was Bruce, later Brahmananda, the Hebrew Paul Bunyan. So we heard about that 2 years ago. Paul Bunyan and he's an American hero who used to plant apple trees, and he was very powerful. He was like the Bhima of America, Paul Bunyan. So that's who Achutananda compared Brahmananda to. He's very powerful. The Swami called him the mountain of our mission. He wore work pants, a t-shirt, and red suspenders. The other boy was Keith, later Kirtanananda, the son of a Baptist pastor at an affluent Long Island church. He seemed to know every line of the Bible. So Kirtanananda later, he founded, along with Hayagriva, our New Vrindavan project in West Virginia. And because he was brought up, his father was a pastor or a preacher, a Christian preacher, He knew the Bible, almost every line of it. So after Srila Prabhupada disappeared, he later tried to combine Vaishnava philosophy with Christian philosophy to try to make it more attractive to the Westerners. He stopped having the devotees wear saris and dhotis. He put them into the dress of Christian priests. Anyway, it didn't work out. And it only lasted for a few years. You'll see a few remnants of it still in our society, like Mataji and we have Nartaki Mataji. They'll still wear saffron cloth, though Srila Prabhupada never said that the women should wear saffron cloth, things like that. But the combination of the two, the watering down of Krishna consciousness with Christianity, did not work well within ISKCON. So Kirtananda's plan for that did not work. So Bruce's brother, Gregory, later Gargamuni, lived in the store as well. "We'll put some blankets down here and there," he said. "We have rats." Bruce had met the Swami a few months before and had called his brother. Okay, so this is just to let you know about how Achyutananda got to move into the temple. I have one more. Okay. This one's done. Fine. Hayagriva and Umapadi had cleaned up their Mott Street place and were using it only for chanting, sleeping, or reading Swamiji's Bhagavatam. Satsvarup had announced one day that the devotees could use his apartment just around the corner from the temple for taking showers. Because remember, all the devotees living in the temple downstairs, they had to share Prabhupada's bathroom. Prabhupada would allow them to take showers up there, but they only had one towel, a blue towel. So all the devotees plus Srila Prabhupada used that one towel. So Satsvarup, who still had his job and was living outside, he had rented an apartment, he now allowed the devotees to come and shower at his apartment. And the next day, Rairam had moved in to Satsvarup's apartment, and the others began using the apartment as a temple annex. Jadharani kept making her early morning treks from the Bronx. Remember, she had to come an hour and a half. She would leave at 5 o'clock in the morning to get there at 6:30 for the class from the Bronx. Swamiji had said that he had no objection to her living in the second room of his apartment, but that people would talk. Because Prabhupada only had his one little room where he had his trunk as a desk, and he had a little mat, and he would sleep on that mat. He would work at his desk and then lie down and sleep there. He didn't have a bed or anything. And then the other room, that was where he had his altar, where they would make all the offerings. That was where all the devotees would sit and take prasadam. So it was very difficult for Jadharani to come an hour and a half every morning and then go back home an hour and a half. So Prabhupada said, "You can stay in my apartment, but people would talk." So therefore Jadharani continued to come and go every single day. Even Rupanuga and Damodar, whose backgrounds and tastes were different, were also positively dependent on the daily morning class and the evening class 3 nights a week, and in knowing that Swamiji was always there in his apartment whenever they needed him. So Rupanuga and Damodar, they were married. They had wives. Rupanuga had a little son, a 2-year-old son named Eric, who later became Ekanath. So they had a different lifestyle, just like Mukunda and Janaki. They had been married, of course. They had left by now to go to San Francisco. So, but still, all of these devotees, whether they lived in the temple, whether they were living at the Mott Street apartment, whether they were staying at Satsvarup's apartment or people like Jadharani who were coming every single day from where they lived, they were very dependent on these regular classes given by Srila Prabhupada morning and evening. There were, however, some threats to this security. Prabhupada would sometimes say that unless he got permanent residency from the government, he would have to leave the country. But he had gone to a lawyer, and after the initial alarm, it seemed that Swamiji would stay indefinitely. Because remember, all this time, from September 1965, now it's November 1966, that's more than 1 year. He just came on a 1-month tourist visa. And then he got extended and extended and extended. Otherwise, you have to go out and you have to get an immigration visa if you want to get permanent residency. Eventually, that's what Srila Prabhupada had to do. There was also the threat that he might go to San Francisco, because last week we heard that Mukunda had written to Prabhupada, and although Prabhupada was very exhausted that day from having the recording, when Mukunda invited him to come to San Francisco, he immediately became full of energy again and said that he wanted to go. So for the New York devotees, that created a lot of tension for them. They didn't want Prabhupada to go. He said he was going, but then sometimes he said he wasn't. If the negotiations through Mr. Price for the building on 10th Street came through, then Swamiji said he would make his headquarters in New York City and not go to San Francisco. So things were a little, they weren't quite sure whether they were going to be able to keep Prabhupada in New York at this time. So Prabhupada, by this time, by November, he started making rules and regulations for the devotees. In the beginning, he wasn't doing that until they became initiated. Then they had to take their vows. So this is one of the notices that Prabhupada put up. All initiated devotees must attend morning and evening classes, must not be addicted to any kind of intoxicants, including coffee, tea, and cigarettes. They are forbidden to have illicit sex connections, must be strictly vegetarian, should not extensively mix with non-devotees, should not eat foodstuffs cooked by non-devotees, should not waste time in idle talks, nor engage himself in frivolous sports, should always chant and sing the Lord's holy names, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Thank you. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Acharya. International Society for Krishna Consciousness, 26 2nd Avenue, New York, New York, dated November 25th, 1966. So, frivolous sports. What does frivolous sports mean? You know, when Krishna and Balaram used to play with their friends, they would sport here in the forests. So there are Vaishnava sports. That includes wrestling and swimming, ball playing. So these are sports that the Prabhupada allowed the devotees to engage in. He would have the boys here at the Gurukula go to the Jamuna every day for swimming, and they were allowed to learn wrestling together, like that. There are Krishna conscious sports as well that the devotees engage in. But frivolous sports, that's something different, like cricket. All right, so we've gone over time, and we'll hear more next week. Hare Krishna.